have to
copies?
share.
I think it was time.
We're on a strict budget here.
Correct.
Strict.
That's fine.
Been a while already.
I'm gonna have Jim, I'm gonna have sort of rotating department.
You must be Jake.
I'm gonna be-
Good evening, everyone, to the joint meeting of the Oshkosh Common Council and the Oshkosh Area School District. We plan this meeting to run an hour and a half. We will end promptly at 7:30. We have a rather long agenda, and I'd like to keep on task. The public is very welcome to observe this proceedings, but there is no room for public comment. That does not happen in workshops with any of the groups in the city and so forth. So if there is a need to a public comment, the time to do it is either during a regular council meeting or a school board meeting. So with that, we'll start with introductions. I'm Mayor Steve Cummings.
I'm Jim Collins, Transportation Director.
I'm Steve Herman, Deputy Mayor of the Council.
Caroline Pansky, City Council.
Jake Krause, City Council.
Peschel, School Board.
Stephanie Carlin, School Board.
Allison Garner, President, School Board.
Barbara Herzog, Vice President, School Board.
Dan Mack, Superintendent of Schools. Jim Evans, School Board.
Kelly Olmsted, Treasurer, School Board.
Steve Eliason, School Board.
Lori Palmieri, Common Council.
Mark Roloff, City Manager.
Thank you. First on the agenda is an item listed here as student transportation. Stan, who would like to take the lead?
We have heard from our friends with Esther, as has the council, regarding the issue of considering student transportation, and we've explored a number of issues, but we first of all wanted to make sure that we understood what was the real problem, and statistically we've sought out comparative data. We have a sister school district and a sister city to our north, that being Appleton, who has been doing student transportation since 2010. And we wanted to see how did our transportation or our absenteeism and truancy compare with theirs. And now after 5 years, they would have been pretty acculturated to having students having access to student transportation and its availability in Appleton. And we then compared that data with our own experience. All of this data comes by way of the DPI, Department of Public Instruction, that tracks attendance for all school districts. And Julie Conrad in our district office took the time to explore that information, and the results of that data do not show, and in fact, in most cases, our attendance data is better than Appleton's without transportation, and that truancy and absenteeism is a parental involvement issue, and that access to transportation, in our case, it does not show that we have a low attendance or low or high truancy as a result of that. We have quite a number of pieces, and unfortunately, we produced enough for mayor and council and school board to have copies. We don't have additional copies here tonight, but we can certainly make them available. But the statistics that would indicate that we are comparable, in fact, our attendance rates and truancy rates are above the state average, and in many categories, we're actually above Appleton, even with transportation. So the real question comes, how does, if we're seeking a different set of questions, the real issue would be to what outcome are we attempting to seek on transportation issues over time. And we've compared it with both impoverished and not impoverished students to determine what differences does that make. And we can't see the appreciable difference, and that's really the results of the study we've done. We can continue to explore, and Julie Conrad outlines for us a series of questions that we could ask further on that in the presentation, and I'll turn that to Julie if for the additional questions, or I'll just continue, whichever you're comfortable with, Julie.
Grab a chair.
Grab a chair.
Yeah. That way you can be,
We're gonna be
then you can be by
casual
a,
and informal, right?
then you can be by a mic
Yeah,
too.
so,
right?
So as we started to look at the data, the question is we know that for many of our students and many of our community members that transportation is a barrier. I mean, but the thing is that if we're going to talk about this as a joint city school district solution, one of my questions is what data point or key performance indicator are we really trying to impact? Because if we're going forward and we're saying we're doing this because we want to increase attendance rates at our schools, we're not showing the need in that data point. But on the other hand, we do know that transportation ends up being the barrier. So I think the questions that I would like us to consider and look forward is, does the availability of transportation impact attendance in specific parts of the city or the school district? Should we look at like targeted strategies, depending on where students live or where other members of the community? How do other factors that contribute to attendance rate and truancy contribute to this? We know that when students are truant, and truancy meaning that they're unexcused or they're not coming to school for 5 or more days within a semester. What are those factors? And we know that those factors and the reasons behind that are just as numerous as and individualized for each student and for each family. How does access to quality and affordable child care impact attendance rates and truancy? We know that some of our families, especially with older students, you'll see that attendance rates decline as you start to get into high school. We know that older children watching younger children also impacts things. And I think the bigger question is does the availability of transportation impact participation in extracurriculars and evening school events? Most often, the English language learner program comes under my umbrella, and we're often supporting transportations of families so that they can be engaged with their students in their schools, and that's after 6 o'clock when bus transportation is over for the evening. And then, once again, I just really think it's more about what community issues or concerns are we truly trying to address and make sure that's at the forefront. But saying that this is going to help our attendance rates by doing this piece, that's not the indicator that really would show that the need for this. So how do we want to tackle it?
But do we have any data on, like, say, north side students versus west side students or south side students that are not getting to school? Is there areas of the city, do we have that data?
Well, we have data as far as like attendance rate and where truancy, like by school. I just did a global overview. If we want to go further into that, we can. But just the high level data right now is not showing that that's the performance indicator that we want to look at or we want to move. What I think we need to more clearly identify what is the true issue, what's the true barrier to transportation, and is this the solution we want to go after?
We could invest in the transportation as proposed, or a $50,000 investment, and based on our comparative data with Apple, we wouldn't see a blip in the change of attendance.
Yes.
That's really the reality there is, and the truancy rate. So if there are other issues we're trying to solve, and Julie outlines them very well, and our municipal transportation system doesn't deal with issues after 6 o'clock, of which nighttime events, extracurricular activities that and practices that end generally beyond 6 p.m. That are going on. So we in this case we've got a problem that is not solvable by a simple transportation cure that goes well beyond that issue, and I don't think that the city's in a position to expand its transportation services that would run till 9 o'clock at night, that would serve students that don't have student transportation well.
The city's in the process of updating its transportation development plan. Jim, we do that how often? Every three?
Oh, every
5
5
years?
to 10 years. We've been doing it about every 5 years.
So we're updating that. That's probably going to be finished sometime early in 2019. And one of the ongoing issues, and it's long before the Esther organization brought this issue up, is how can we make the bus system go later? Quite honestly, the issue didn't start with students. It actually started with workers, which is clearly a big issue in the community right now. And it's really, how do we accommodate second shift workers, because they're the ones who can and I've heard people tell me this, the mayor and I rode the bus one day just to kind of, just get a feel for what our ridership was like, and a person told me, well, I can get to work for second shift, I just can't get home. And that creates a problem. So that's a challenge that we have at the city regardless of this issue. And even with our 6:30 stop time for some of the activities, that's just not going to accommodate it. The Appleton School District and the Valley Transit System operates, because they have multiple municipalities that are part of that. They have about 12 or 13 different municipalities that are involved in that. We have 1.5 if you include the county for the Route 10 between here and Neenah. Our transportation development plan a few years ago made some great strides. We took a couple routes and stopped them from just being using downtown as our hub, and we had a north side route and a west side route. That helped improve things by giving more access to it, because we operate on 30-minute routes, and you can only stretch that rubber band for 30 minutes. You can't go 31 minutes, it's 30. So by putting it on the west side, we expanded our service area a little bit. But whenever you move service in one area, you're giving it up in another. There's still people that have to walk to bus stops, and we get complaints that people are walking too far already to our bus stops. So those are challenges that I think we're hoping to address in the Transportation Development Plan. Councilmember Pansky is actually the chair of our Transit Committee, and I know that's something that you know that you need to look at for the next year.
I mean, really though, honestly, there are evening needs, we realize that, but our ridership actually drops off substantially after 5 o'clock. So you also have to consider, and I know this is something that the Transit Development Plan Committee, Steering Committee has looked at, is that, it's very expensive to run a full fixed route system for what is pretty limited ridership in the evening, what we would get. So I don't want to get anyone's hopes up that we're going to be expanding service, because that hasn't come to be one of the priorities that the Steering Committee's found so far. But it is something that we discuss, obviously. But we're in the same position as I'm sure the school district is as well. As we, if you want to expand service, you got to get funding from somewhere, and we have declining funding, not increasing funding. So without additional funding, it's going to be hard to expand that service. But the other point I just wanted to make is that I know the school district currently does buy passes from us and provide those to the schools. And I'm not sure exactly how the program works, but I know that the students that are in need, there is an option out there for them. So I do know the school district is addressing this issue to some extent. To what extent it doesn't address the issue, I don't know. I mean, obviously, some of you folks do. If there is that unmet need, I don't know. But I know the school district is addressing the issue in some ways.
Can I just ask a very blunt question? Where did this issue come from then? I mean, as council, we've had people come to our meetings. I have about a dozen emails in the past few weeks. I rode the elevator with a student who's affected by this issue. So what's the root of the problem? How did this come about where this is the main item on our agenda tonight? If you guys are saying that you don't have the data that supports your attendance issue, how did we all get here?
Obviously, there was some discussion with individual students that identified it as an issue. However, the way the questions were asked in the survey, every one of us around the table would say yes to each of them. Is it inconvenient to not get to school? It wasn't a survey that was a scientific survey, and you're dealing with numbers there that have led individuals to perceive that it is a problem. When looked at by the district, it doesn't show that it makes a difference, and that we know that truancy is and absenteeism is really something that starts in elementary school with parents not ensuring that children get to school, and that it's a pattern that develops but would not be necessarily impacted by transportation. Obviously, from the large-scale process that Appleton uses, it hasn't changed, whether they've reflected on the fact that since they've instituted it in now going on 7 years since 2010, their attendance rates and truancy rates have not improved. And so the real question is, maybe individuals feel better, but they don't, it doesn't tackle the problem. And so their absentee and truancy rates are common to ours, and in both of our cases, and several of them, we're above the state average in attendance.
Steve, you wanted to make a comment?
Well, yes, I understand that we can't really tonight accommodate a number of public comment 3-minute blocks, but it feels odd to have advocates in the room who've been working tirelessly on this project, and I wonder if we could have a representative from Esther, or I see friends from the Boys and Girls Club, or the CLCs, or just some voice of advocacy, just to sort of hear. I don't know how we do that or make this.
why?
Yes.
I agree.
I mean, these people are here, let them speak.
So, I'm actually in agreement with that, but I think I want to just talk about an idea that I think goes along the lines of what you're discussing, Steve, is talking about the organizations that exist in our communities that have worked on some of these issues already and other things that have taken place in the past. During, I hate to refer to eras like this, but during the Obama era, there was a form of funding that was called the New Freedom Transportation Funds. And basically what it was is that it was federal dollars that I think the districts also get and the cities also get, municipalities and towns get, that was used to address some of the needs, transportation needs that existed in our communities. Maybe it was an organization that worked with persons who were disabled, and it would help them purchase a van or an accommodating vehicle that would help their clients get from point A to point B. And I just put this out as an idea because it was mainly an idea that I put into action in our community about 10 years ago, and I played the role of a mobility manager. I helped people get where they needed to be using the existing resources that existed in our community, and I helped those entities that would help, like give the rides, I helped them get paid for it. So, and all the while, people got to go to their jobs, they got to make more income. Students got to school because they literally got a voucher that was used to pay the cab company to get them minimally to the nearest bus stop. Not necessarily all the way to school, but to the nearest bus stop. And so I guess I want to kind of shape the conversation with us as elected leaders, that there are resources out there that exist that we can tap. We need to be able to build that coalition of entities and communities that can think creatively about what we can do to do this. I don't know if throwing out a boatload of cash to cover bus passes and tokens and bus rides is the answer to that, because we still may have that issue of those small amounts of people that are still going to maybe get through those, still have those issues. But the idea, I think what we're trying to do is we're trying to figure out a solution that is beneficial to the children in our community getting to the places where they need to be, help them be successful. Whether that's at school, whether that's at employment, whether that's at the Boys and Girls Club, whether it's at, their favorite gaming store on Oregon Street. I think the idea is that we want to increase mobility of our families in our community, and that's really what this comes down to. And I think we can sit around the table and talk about that all we want, but I think the real thing is really is building some type of conversation where we all go out and find out where are the resources for that, so that we can do it better than just throwing money down for bus passes, because I think that's great and everything, but I don't think that's the answer to it. And frankly, if we're going to throw down bus passes, and I'm going to put that out there, we should just let children ride the bus for free in Oshkosh, in all reality. And I'm going to put that out there is because I think that's really the best option. We don't have to worry about it. It costs a lot more on the city's end. But I think if we're gonna talk about transit being the solution, bus transit, then we should just let kids ride free. So, with that said, city already does that a little bit in the summer, right? Our kids get to ride the bus for free. Our children of the Oshkosh Area School District, maybe outside of our community, get to ride the bus to the library. We're already supporting that mission of educating our kids in the summer when they have less access to that. Now we're talking about figuring out ways of providing them more access to where we want them to be during the day and partially in the afternoons. So I'm open to letting some people from the audience also express.
Well, I've always viewed this as a two-part question. When we got the emails and letters, which we thank you for doing that, it's nice to hear from people. It seemed to me that the survey showing the people that can't get to school is kind of opening line to get our attention. And even though our numbers don't quite match up with what they had, if one person can't get to school, that's one person too many. But I think the second and most important part is probably the participation in extracurriculars and after-school events. I think that extracurricular activities and after-school events is such a big part of school. And if you're locked out doing that because you don't have a ride home, I think that's a problem. But that runs into our time where they stop running at 6 o'clock.
It's
6:30.
around 6:30. Depends where you are, but
So if,
Yeah,
like basketball
that's
game, all
pretty
that
good.
is out of the question. I also think part of it is maybe trying to get some parity with the college and Fox Valley Tech, because they all have the free ride with their ID, if I'm correct.
yeah, what we have with them is a revenue agreement. So it would basically, they provide us with revenue per every year to account or to pay for their UWO. It's for their faculty, students, and alumni. So it's a benefit for their alumni and faculty as well as their students. And then Fox Valley Tech just does it for their students. But with a valid current ID, then they can ride it's not free. They pay the city an amount of money to do that. So it's similar to what we would suggest with the school district. It's similar to what other cities have with, if they have what Esther's proposing, like Valley Transit, for instance, they pay the city so they're revenue neutral to provide that service. So it's not free. It's free to the user, but it's not free.
Is that
Throw that into tuition.
rated to how often it's used, or it's just a set amount? And if
Yeah.
you go over that, it's
So with the university, we have a ceiling and a floor, and then there's a per ride charge in between the two, and usually we're somewhere in the middle. So they pay the floor plus, and then a little bit per ride over that. So it's in between those two amounts.
I believe it's a charge on the student activity fees for the.
Yeah, I believe so.
And that was a student initiated.
It's actually their student association kind of runs that service.
I have several perspectives on this. I've been giving this a lot of thought because I think the Esther Group came to the Oshkosh School District at least a year and a half ago. I remember Barbara Kuhn and some others coming forward on this issue. Many of you may have heard the story about the starfish on the beach, all these starfish that washed up on the beach, and there was a gentleman out there who was picking up one starfish at a time and flinging it into the ocean. Someone came along and asked him what he was doing, and he said, well, he was saving these starfish. And this person said, well, you can't save all of them. There are too many. He said, but I'll make a difference for those that I managed to get back in the water. So I view this somewhat of along that nature. And when I look at these data, especially the last graph on the attendance rate for Oshkosh schools, there's roughly a 2% differential between economically disadvantaged and not. And that 2% that represents those starfish are impacted by this. A couple of years, well, several years ago, I had the opportunity to serve as principal at Washington Elementary School for 2 months, December and January. And we had a number of students that year who were not able to get to school, or they came late because it was cold, very cold, lots of snow, and the phone calls from the parents mostly were along the lines of, I can't get my car started. if you know the Washington attendance area, and I don't know that it's changed all that much since I was in that role, there are a lot of families who walk their children to school. They bring infants in buggies, and regardless of the weather. And so if they don't have a car that starts, that's a problem. And if you're a high school student and you live in the Washington attendance area, that's a long walk to North High School. So on those really cold days or rainy days, if kids avail themselves of the buses, I think that's great. The St. Vincent de Paul store, I know, makes bus passes available. I'm currently serving on that board. I'm a new member on that board, and Laura Longcow, that's not her name, Laura, can't think of her last name. Anyway, that board and Laura might be interested in maybe turning those bus passes into a system where they're paying on a per ride rate. I don't know, I think it would be worth approaching. I also serve on the Women's Fund Board, and we've had a lot of conversations over the years about the buses in terms of the second shift workers, that's already been brought up, and Parkview, from the context of the study on isolation they did some years ago, and people wanting to visit their loved ones at Parkview, but they can get there, but they can't stay as late as they'd like. And I'm not saying we have to add a second shift to the bus, I'm just saying these are some of the concerns that have come up. As a school district, we have a policy that talks about continuous improvement. And I think this is an opportunity for us to demonstrate that in terms of, why don't we try this? Getting the proper people together, but setting up some criteria so we know what the impact is. Does it increase attendance? Does it increase participation in activities after school? What's the impact? I just spent 2 days in Madison, along with 49 other people, reading the applications for the Cole scholarships, the Herb Cole Student Scholarships, Principal Award of the Year, and Teachers of the Year. And the one thing that kept stressing with us was impact. And reading about a young lady in a foster home situation who has to ride the bus to her waitress job, and therefore she can't participate in various school activities because she's having to pay her way, so to speak, had a big impact on many of us. And they asked us, don't look at the grade point average, don't look at the rank in class, but what impact have these children had on what they've done with the resources available to them, and how they've been able to be successful or demonstrate excellence. So I think in keeping with the district's policy, it's stated in there in more than one policy, I think it's in the 1000 series, continuous improvement. We could put something into place, we could evaluate it after a period of time and see if it makes any difference. If it doesn't make any difference, then we tweak it and move on. But I think there are enough starfish out there, based on the number of emails I've read in the last 2 days, that I would be in favor of exploring doing something to help this 2%.
I just wanted to touch on something too. What these measurables really don't show is the possible hardships young families have, making choices, taking that infant in their stroller. I mean, that kid's not comfortable. We gotta have compassion for people and families. Maybe a young family might choose Appleton to move to instead of Oshkosh because they provide that service, and we don't. So I mean, there's lots of stuff that isn't in here that just can be factored in using some common sense.
At the present time, Sue, am I correct, between $13,000 and $18,000 is invested in passes at the present time?
For a variety of reasons,
for-
not just for this situation, like we do have access for kids who have a need, but it's also includes homeless transportation.
I just had one more question too. So we have about a 3% difference on the non-economically challenged, and how many kids are enrolled in the Oshkosh school system? I mean, that 3% is a huge number.
Right
if
at
you-
10,000
Well, you have to, when the chart that you're referring to, is actually just
Oh, just high school.
is just high school.
Overall,
So,
what is
right,
the
so if you look at that, going through there, just something to keep in mind about the data is, going back to what Barb was referencing, we just need to be clear, what are the indicators or what are those points that we're gonna say this is successful or not successful? Because looking back at like Appleton's, it's not necessarily impacting it. It doesn't mean that it doesn't have an impact on a student and that transportation's not an issue. It's absolutely an issue. I just think we need to be focused on what key indicator are we really looking at, because the trend here is showing that you're not going to see the movement in the attendance rate or in truancy rate that we think we are. It's going to impact students in the other ways. We just need to be very clear on what that data point and what we're looking at to evaluate the success, because I'm looking at this data, attendance rate or truancy is not going to be, you're not going to see the impact from it. That's all we're saying on that.
One other question, the district covers more than the city of Oshkosh. So how do we take care of the students in the town of Algoma, the town of Black Wolf,
Well,
the
those
town
students,
of Oshkosh?
those students are already bused because they're outside the domain of that municipal transportation issue. And we're also dealing with the students that are west of 41 are also bused because of hazardous crossing. So we're talking about the operating portion of the city of Oshkosh that is north and south, but all east of 41.
That's through a school bus, not.
School bus, right.
So,
And
so let me,
Excuse me, but that does not, also, our school buses do not run for evening transportation either. They only operate. There are districts that have made the investment over time, what they call activity bus transportation, but that does not take care of games. It takes care of getting a second run with not as comprehensive distances that get bus students home after practices after school. And some districts do that. We have not done that either, so, excuse me.
No, so are those students that are bused outside of the city limits, is there a separate revenue agreement for that, or is that another bus company that's Cobusin or something along those lines? Okay, so, boy, that's interesting.
'Cause it's part of a formula that's allocated by the state.
Sure. I know that kind of, I guess, probably feeds into that discussion about the city option and that. But, and then speaking of hazardous crossings, I mean, is there any part of the city that doesn't have a train crossing? Are there, there are sections of our city where we don't have sidewalks, that are so within the district too.
We then bus in those areas, and then the police department's crossing guards aid us in the other hazardous crossing areas. For example, Sawyer, 9th Avenue, each of those, South Park Boulevard, all of those have crossing guards that aid us in that safety of transportation.
It also occurred to me, in addition to us talking about transit, that, I believe when Esther gave their presentation, there was reference to this impacting middle school and high school students more so because of distance. And I guess that I'm kind of wondering too, I don't know what the number of licensed drivers, student drivers there are in the high schools, but I'm kind of thinking along the lines of, this may not just be a one size approach. There may be something creative in terms of allowing students to bring their car to campus if they carpool.
They
or-
can't.
Oh,
State law,
they can't.
They can only have one driver, one passenger in their car until they're 18. The laws have changed on what you can and cannot do when you get your driver's license.
So they can't have one
Yeah, so
passenger.
they can have their siblings, they can have immediate family, and then they can't have any of that when they have their temps, but when they get their driver's license, they can only have one person outside of their immediate family in their vehicle for, what is it, like 2 years?
Yeah, it's 2 years.
Yeah.
That changes
So
the
they
whole
can't.
going to the drive-in movie theater,
Yeah.
doesn't it?
But that's one, that's
Right.
2 per car as opposed to
Right.
maybe just
Yeah.
one.
And bearing in mind that our lowest use of the parking lots of schools is the first day of school, because sophomores, as they turn 16, our parking lots become fuller and fuller, because that's a moving target during the year, because freshmen are not old enough to have a driver's license. But as students take the test and as they turn age 16 as sophomores, then the parking lots become increasingly full all the way through to the last school day of the year. And so that's a rotating number. But the restrictions on carrying additional passengers
Just one.
prohibit that kind of Lyft or Uber kind of situation.
What happens to students when sporting events, when the team comes back to the school, in some cases, away games very late at night? How do they get home?
Parents and/or the students themselves have cars.
But it does keep kids from joining sports because they cannot get home.
And I don't know of any district that operates post-game event transportation at night at all.
Jim,
They get home pretty late sometimes, too.
Jim, so what happens to our bus in the scenario where we're already running the bus to the stops? Some people are already on the bus, but in the scenario in which we say, okay, students ride free, it's not costing us any more to run that bus, correct? To
No, well,
board those students at that same place?
right. So what it is right now we have, students are obviously, some of them are purchasing either bus passes or they're purchasing a one-way fare. So right now we get about 50,000 in revenue a year from students. We know that. And then the school district spends, I don't know the exact number. It's anywhere between 15 and 19,000 on bus passes. So that's about 69,000 in revenue that we have in our budget that we count on to operate. So if we said that, all students with an ID can ride for free, that's where we came up with, the school district would probably have to come up with about $50,000 in order to implement that program, assuming that ridership stays as it is currently. Now, if ridership increases, and our buses get more full, we know that we're at or close to capacity at the high schools after school. We've added a second bus to West after school a few years ago, and also we have 2 routes that go to North, but we know that those are pretty close to capacity now. So if we get to the point where we need to add more service, then we're going to have to also ask for more cost there, more cost sharing, and we'll have to renegotiate. Now, Appleton, since we're talking about that as an example, when they started their program, it was supposed to be a pilot program, and that started in 2010, 2011. Now we're in 2018. They haven't adjusted their amount, which I think they miscalculated to start with, but I think maybe their thought was that it was a test program. And so I know they're looking at it now to see if it's the right agreement, but that's the only thing I caution you on. I know that from what I've seen, it's much easier to give than it is to take it back. So, we as Go Transit and speaking for the city, as long as we're revenue neutral, we're more than willing to help in any way we can to solve the issue. But we do count on that revenue in our budget, and obviously there are people out there that are affording that transportation. So, I'm glad that Julie has some of this data, because that's stuff I don't have. But we'll work with you any way you want to. You just kind of got to let us know what you want us to do.
Part of what we wanted to comparison, because we were hearing the Appleton situation, and we did not know what the outcome would be until we did the comparative data, and we thought, well, if Appleton is showing attendance rates and truancy rates that are appreciably better than ours, we felt, well, we've got the answer to the question that we could certainly justify from economic investment and the return on really serving a broader group of students. When we saw the comparative data, and I made the contacts with the superintendent's office in Appleton to check the history of what occurred, and that affirms that pilot that they indicated to us as well. And then apparently after the pilot, they continued on a year-to-year basis in all those years since the 11-12 through now the 17-18 school year.
Let me throw this out for consideration. Obviously, the bottom line is money. City, school district, that's the bottom line, is dollars. And how do we fund it? But we've heard over the years, if a manufacturer's second shifts, it's a problem. The big box stores, the Walmarts, a lot of people go shopping at Walmart that don't have a car. Would it make sense not to treat this as a school issue or a manufacturer's issue, a community issue, and make contact with, we know what we're trying to do here, make contact with the manufacturers, talk to the folks at the Walmarts and say, you know, if you want customers, yeah, help us bring the customers to you. And I think look at it as a complete, I guess, citywide issue. And I was thinking about, you know, the school events, you're busy 9 months out of the year. You have to hire more people, and then they're laid off for 3 months, so that's another consideration.
Although, don't they use it more in the summer? The students use it more in, no?
I don't think like they do it in the school.
No, not in the evening.
No, our student ridership drops off substantially in the summer.
But would that make sense, look at it as a community-wide from all different,
Having been at all bus stops in the school district at varying times, I see both at West and at North, because of GO Transit's a very appropriate, helpful scheduling, having bus pickups that were within 10 to 15 minutes after dismissal on Smith, for example, the buses, that bus connection for those students who choose to participate is a wonderful connection. Its location is there. It's really, again, the issue of cost. And some of those students are paying themselves, and some of them have passes that have been distributed by the district and using it. And so as far as the delivery system, bearing in mind that GO Transit, because of its routes, is not nearly as convenient as school buses, because we get far closer, and we always remind with transportation, remember, we're a bus system, not a cab system, because cabs come to your home. The school buses come to the end of the road or in a collection point, and so none of them get to what may be the ideal of what you suggested of a family car being able to transport, because we don't do that either. And we do have unique circumstances where, because of we constant on a daily basis, we have homeless families that we work with that are temporarily dislocated, and in many cases the only way that works is with using cabs to get them to, because the law would indicate that in good practice, it's not just the law, but that we keep children in their same school regardless of where they are temporarily in a homeless situation. And so we need to transport children from wherever they've been located by whichever social service agency that's helping them. We then transport them to and from school until their condition is relieved.
Every day when I'm home at between 5 and 5:15, I see the supervisor from the after-school program at E-Cook walk 6 children who appear to be roughly in age from 5 to maybe 10, walk past my house en route to the bus stop on the corner of East Bent and Bowen. I know those children depend on that transportation, and I give that supervisor a lot of kudos. Today they were especially energetic as they were walking down the street. So they were all fired up. They were positive as they were walking along the sidewalk. But I know those children depend on that bus transportation. And so I thank you for providing that, and the city for providing that for those kids so that they can partake in that after-school program.
are we pretty much in agreement, both the school board and the council, to look at this as a city issue, that it affects all different aspects of the city? It's not just the schools, it's not just manufacturers, and I don't know how much clout we would have, but, you know, taking people out to these malls, these box stores, I mean, we're bringing them customers, and I think they should be willing to help us bring them their customers.
It is a laudable goal, and our only point this evening is, let's not use improvement of attendance on, because it's a variable that we're shooting in the dark on that issue, because children in Oshkosh and children in Appleton are no different. Families in Appleton and Oshkosh are no different. The impact of having additional. If we want to deal with the issue of having people convenienced and feel better, then that's a different issue, but how do we measure that?
Right, and that's to the point, to like Bob said, you know, on his point and Barb's, I think the key thing is that it is a community issue. And I think as a community, we can address it. Is it, like Bob said, everybody gets to ride the bus, every student, and we work out an arrangement? And if that works, because as I've talked to Jim before, all our buses go by every school, as Councilmember Palmieri also said. So that issue isn't there. So it just comes down to how do we get to those few students that need that little extra help, or the parents in a sense, and then can we overall improve the quality of our public transportation for everybody? Whether it's work, school, play. We know at this point we can't probably do the after school too much, maybe the early after school, but you know, I remember coming home from North after a game and it was late, you know, but we could carpool back then. And we did a lot of that. And so, but I also took the bus all the way over to West for 1 year too, so.
As did I.
And several
Yes.
people.
So there's a lot of ways
The
I think
buses
we.
do cross the river.
Yes, they do. But I do think there are a lot of, I don't want to say simple solutions, but I think as we work through this and using this data, and data's really drives everything, we all know that. I think there's room in the way to fund this somehow for the upcoming school year for sure. We have time.
Want to hear from anyone from the audience? I know some of us jumped in.
Yes, yeah, I was just
Included
gonna
that.
say, several of us wanted to, I think, hear at least from Esther, if there is a representative, if that can be allowed.
The co-chair.
Yeah, I'm the chair.
If there's someone from Esther that would be a spokesperson for Esther, would come up.
Or even a student, if there's any students that are available here.
Right here. Now we can talk into the mic.
Hi.
Relax. What school do you go to?
I go to North. I'm a freshman.
You're a freshman at North, okay. And how do you get to school most days?
Sometimes my dad drives me, but I take the bus a lot.
Okay, and do you pay for it, or do you get a pass through the school? Or?
For Christmas, I was given a bus pass. It was really expensive for a bus pass. It was $25.
Okay.
And so I got that for January. And now, like with February starting, I have to pay $2 to get to school and back.
Okay.
And get transferred.
Move the microphone.
And how far from school do you roughly live?
I live really close to Merrill, so it's not like terribly far. But whenever it gets cold or windy, like today, it was pretty cold. I have to walk about a mile-ish.
Okay, and what time do you start school at?
I start school, they ring the bell for you to get to first hour at 8:17, and then they have a few minutes. So pretty much it's at 8:17.
Okay, and you go till when?
3:30.
3:30. Are you involved in any after-school programming?
Kind of. I'm in band. So I have to physically do pep band. So yeah, I guess.
Okay, so you rely on public transportation
Yeah.
most of the time?
No, yeah, I'd say maybe about half.
Anybody, other questions? I seem to be the moderator.
Great job. That's
good. You're next to the hot seat.
Okay.
Can I just make a couple
Sure.
comments on her? Obviously, it's all perspective from what my perspective is compared to somebody else. Like she said, $2, $25. To some of us, that's a lot of money. To some of us, it's not a lot of money. I mean, if we can't take care of the most important people in Oshkosh, which are our kids, and the future of Oshkosh, I mean, we can add money to bathrooms all the time, can add money to sidewalks. $50,000 is a lot of money, but at the same time, it's not a lot of money. So, I mean, I don't support giving free bus passes all over, all night long, but I mean, to school hours, why can't we do that? Thank you.
Participate in, like is it called 0 hour at North?
I do not, because it's nearly physically impossible for me to get there on time without having to be very cranky. But when I take the bus, I just have to get up at like 5:30 in the morning, and I really hate it.
No, that's.
So if you were able to, would a bus allow you to either participate in 0 hour or meet with a teacher On a question or a
A bus
concern you had?
definitely could get me to 0 hour easier.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not saying I'd still take one because I don't want to do that.
Okay.
But,
Got that.
and meeting,
So 0 starts like at 7, right? 7:20?
7:40.
yeah, something like that.
So you'd have to get on the bus at 5:30 to get on school?
No.
Usually I wake up at 5:30, get ready. Yeah, and then I probably, if I was on the bus route going to north instead of coming back from north, I'd probably be able to wake up a lot later.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
'cause I tried to
Anything
get-
else you want to say?
I tried on the very first day of school. My dad had an MRI scan because he's pretty sick, and so I was like, okay. So I biked to school that day, and I was almost late. That's not really good. And I realized that this was going to be a problem. So probably around early October, like October 1st, 2nd, 3rd-ish, I went because someone told me that you can get a bus pass if you're a free and reduced price lunch student, which I am. And I went there, and they said they're gone. They were gone very quickly. So I had to go to one of my teachers I barely knew the name of and ask for $1 just to get home. And I've had to do it with my friends. I've had to do it with a teacher once. Sometimes I have to really kind of hound them like, hi, can I get $1? I need to go home. Can I have that, please? Thank you. And it's really embarrassing. You have to, go to teacher and get $1 from them.
And see, these are the problems we can solve, and there's thousands of students in Oshkosh just like this.
This morning, my mom was feeling kind of ick, so she still slept in, and I couldn't find my bus pass anywhere. And so I had to go and take money from her to get to school and have to explain to her through a phone call or coming back home, you're wondering where your $2 went. Well, I had to take your $2, and if my dad is home in time to pick me up, I will give you said $1 back. I promise. Yeah, and it's really, and there's kids who always telling me some kids who get 3-month bus passes and stop needing them, who sell them to other kids because they need to get home, who they'll sell their own stuff, rulers, whatever, maybe a box of pencils to get money to get home, and it's actually kind of depressing sometimes.
Thank you.
So much for being courageous.
We want to hear
That
from
was very scary.
Esther,
Be
we're not
great.
serious. Is there somebody from Esther?
Just imagine how many students aren't as brave as that one that can say something.
I've been told by some students too that the last thing they want to have to do is go into the office to ask for anything because it's too embarrassing.
Okay, you're with Esther, right?
Could it be a possibility that we're not offering these to the free and reduced? Why are we running out? Not okay. And then
We only buy a certain number.
right. So but if we have a student that needs them, can't we go and get more, or is it just the budget that we have? I mean, is that
money.
something that we have to?
So you buy whatever you budget in your budget for this,
I believe so.
you buy that many and
Buy a
and then
bulk.
you give them to the principals or whoever, the guidance counselors, and they determine who gets the
Yes.
passes,
Okay.
right?
And in the design of that entire has been really crisis response as opposed to providing daily consistent transportation.
Okay.
You're only buying these at one time during the year?
No.
You are? Okay, so-
But the total amount is about the $18,000 worth that we've done each year. Yeah.
Do you have a system in place where you are running out of these passes? You can, do you have a backup for
Well, we
for
could
the emergencies?
keep buying and going to $50,000, so, that's really the question.
So when the student says that she went within the first month or two after school started to ask for one, and she was told that they were all out, that there were no more, how does that happen?
Don't they get distributed monthly, Jim? Because when I used to work for the ARC, we used to be a distribution site, and every month one of your business managers would come to us and bring us a certain amount of passes, either monthly or 3-month passes, and that number would change based on how many we sold every month. So
Right.
that's along the similar way that you still handle that?
Well, the school district comes and purchases them from us.
Okay.
So it's a little different from some of the agencies and stuff we work with, but, we'll sell as many as anybody wants to buy. I mean, that's really out of our hands. But more what you're talking about is like some of the places where, so they sell bus passes. So every month, we'll pick up any unused passes and then we'll deliver them, a new supply of passes and they'll sell them. But the school district, from what I understand, I know they're, I can't think of her name off the top of my head, but she comes into the office. Jane, yeah, and she'll buy passes. I don't remember exactly how often she comes in, but she comes in pretty regularly.
Yeah, because they're monthly passes, and so.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Considine, are you here for Esther?
I am here for Esther, yes. So just real quickly, I'm Jennifer Considine. I did the original survey that Stan Fairley said was non-scientific, right? But I think it was also said by James that it's to kick off the conversation, really, and to bring this to the forefront. So I want to thank everybody around the table. I've had really productive conversations with people on the council and with the school board as well. And I think we share, what I'm picking up tonight is that we share the belief that transportation is a barrier and that we got to figure out how to do something about this. I also am picking up, and I think it's fair to say that there's a concern that if we sell this to the community as it's going to change attendance, it might be hard to prove that. So I just, as I was listening, wanted to throw out a couple of other things that maybe we're going to impact. One of them, I think, is that we're going to impact student anxiety and mental health. And I think that's huge and massive. Another thing that I think we could possibly impact here is social worker time.
Yeah.
There are not enough of them to go around for 10,000 students in this district already. And if they're having to spend even an hour or two a week trying to navigate, does this student get a bus pass or not, when they could be intervening with a kid who's having serious mental health crisis, we need to let them do that. And if $50,000 gives them an extra 200 hours a year to do that, to me, that seems really worth it. I also hear, I think Jake was talking about, right, it could be a recruitment issue, right? Not only when we're talking about open enrollment to the district, right, but when we're talking about families moving here, that what does this say about the kind of community that we in fact are? So I think I'm very sensitive to the argument of how do we say that this is really needed, and how do we judge, I think, as Julie said, right, what are the barriers and the data points that we want to impact? And I think we all have to be really sensitive to that, and I certainly, as a member of Esther, I'm very sensitive to that. But I also will underscore again, I've heard time and time again the number of stories from social workers and students saying, this is a big issue for me, this is a big issue for my family, and we need to do something about it. And so I'll just stop with that. Thank you.
Well done. Yeah.
So one of the things when I think about transportation, many times I kind of look at it from the broader picture of it. And I think sometimes it's easy for us as adults to really kind of look at it that way, But the reality is that if we can provide younger students, younger kids, younger adults in our community access to transportation, whether it's just during the school hours, we're also making their home life that much better. They're and some kids, that stressful time of having to get to school in the morning, having to think about that, having to manage that, is something that they're used to relying on us to do, as parents. And I think that if we can reduce that, they're going to do better in school. They're going to come home happier after school. They might do their homework a little bit more. They may have less stress to be able to handle some of the everyday ins and outs. And as fathers, mothers, grandparents, aunts and uncles, I think that trickles right up to us, as the people who are, it's our main role is to support kids in our community, And I think that figuring out something that is as simple, in my mind, I know it's money, but as simple as saying, we're going to support every Oshkosh area school district with transportation to school via the Oshkosh transit system, the GO transit system. I think that goes a long ways in our community, and I think that would be the best goal to work towards. I think there's other issues, and I think the other issue is not that we have to really think about is that the easiest one is kids ride free, but getting kids to the bus stop who are just a little bit outside of that walking area to doing that You know, I think if we can solve this one, we can start putting in the resources that I think are gonna make that small amount of people that we're really talking about, it's gonna be able to allow us to focus on solving those issues. And that's where we get really creative. That's where we start talking to the Boys and Girls Club, start talking to Esther, start talking to the foundation. Foundation's actually, the Oshkosh Area Community Foundation's been working on this issue for about 10 years already. They did one of those, I can't think of the word or the concept of what it's called, where we go out into the community and spend time dealing with transportation issues, experiencing them. So if you gotta go to the bank because, you know, Housing Authority wants you to provide proof of their income, you know, proof of your assets. Well, how long does that take to do that? How long do you gotta wait in line? You know, they've kind of done, the foundation did this about 6 years ago, where they invited community members to come in and experience barriers to resources and the things that are causing those barriers. And so I think that we have some of that information already exists in our community, and I think that we can tackle one, hopefully quickly, and then start tackling that really is, Barb, what I think is that 2 to 3% that we're talking about here. I think it'll make it easier to get those starfish, I guess, is what I'm referring to. Is because I guess that's just my feeling, is that it's just, we've got resources out there. People have been talking about this. I think Esther's just done a really good job of putting it in the forefront for us right now. But this issue has existed for a long time. So.
From the city perspective too, that next item on the agenda where, you know, there's a reference to driveway access, I mean, any parent or grandparent that's played chauffeur, such as I'm in the current throes of for a tween and a teen, at the start of school and at the end of school, I get an anxiety attack just driving up towards that school because of all the traffic. So if we're also thinking about, you know, our environment and our throughways and efficiencies, and I'm sure you've had many complaints to, you know, that idling line, and then there's the pollution and all of that. So I mean, there are some physical environment things that are impacted too, besides the students.
One
more speakers.
One more speaker from the Boys and Girls Club we want to hear from, and then we'll move on to our next topic.
And I'll keep it short. Jamie Wilcox of the Boys and Girls Club for over 30 years, and the impact of transportation for kids just in the last 5 years has increased immensely for us. We do provide bus passes for those children that don't get them from you guys. We're talking $300 to $500 a month sometimes, and not only that, we went out and purchased a bus that we transport our children for some of our at-risk students that we mentor. We go to the high schools and we go to the middle schools and we bring them back. So there are some kids that we're missing that would like to come to us after school for a safe place, homework help and stuff like that. And it'd be awesome. And I guess the biggest thing is we've been hearing this transportation issue for a long time. And I'm glad this meeting's here. It's great talk, but it'd surely be time to try something and to make some kind of impact for those, the few that are falling between the cracks that we're not seeing. So I don't want to take any more time. It's already been an hour, so thank you. If you have any questions.
Thank you. Let's move on. We've got 5 more subjects and 30.
Just to bring closure to this, not closure, but a next step to it. I'd be willing to kind of chair a working committee of city representatives, school board representatives, community organization representatives to broaden the discussion on addressing community transportation needs, even if it's just the small goal of working on addressing students' transportation needs in the greater Oshkosh community. So.
It has to go beyond students. It's got to be everything talked about, employers, and again, I'll say retail, so.
That's fine. I just think that it's important that we leave here today with the idea that we're going to move forward and working towards something. I mean,
Thank you.
figuring it out, so.
Timeline.
So I'd be willing to do the legwork on getting that started.
That's great. Thank you, Bob. That's great.
Yeah, I'm not okay with
I'm sorry, say that again?
I said, if the timeline, if we look at that, quick Bob, and we look at that timeline, that the community can't get this going for a long period of time, because that stuff takes a lot of work and a lot of meetings, I think we should still separately look at our students until that timeline can get, worked in.
I mean, from our perspective, I mean, the city transportation issues, we already are working on our transit development plan, and that's what's gonna guide, the city's transportation, and transit, so this is, we already got that started, so I think the student issue is a separate issue. So I don't know how we wanna address that, but I guess we can have some discussions on what the best path is, but we have to follow our transit development plan, because we've already been working on that for a year now. We're about halfway through it.
Your development plan didn't exclude students, though.
No,
Okay.
no, I mean, it's
Broader than
it's the transit for the city as a whole.
One of the things that I think we have to be keenly aware of because of the network, and I've carefully looked at all the GO Transit bus routes, is there remains, as Barb indicated, watching a set of students being led by, that there are many blocks to get to a bus stop. And our young lady who spoke so well, she talked about what time she would have to get to a bus stop to get to the high school on time, because the routing of the bus does not, it's a long circuitous, she'd have to more than likely go downtown before she gets, necessarily, because if she's having to get on the bus in 5:30.
No, I don't think that's what she was saying. I was thinking she was saying she would have to get up at 5:30.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because she said she lives over at Merrill. We have a bus that goes right by there.
Right, okay.
I mean, there is some areas of the city where you would have to get on the bus, and then you might have to transfer downtown to get where you're going. But we have a pretty extensive network that covers the majority of the city. Really, there's only one area of the city I can think of where you would have to walk, a considerable distance to get to stop, and that's kind of the south east area of the city. That's really the only kind of real gap we have right now. But anyway, but those are things, when we do our transit development plan, we look at, we have, all these wants and needs out there, and then we have a budget to work with, and that's something that the East Central Regional Plan Commission is working on the study for us, and sharing that. But we're looking at all those issues and seeing, okay, well, what's the most important things? And I know Kelly's participated, and Sue's and Caroline are all part of that transit development plan.
And didn't Nick also didn't you forward this study to
Yeah.
Nick to include in the TDP analysis? Okay.
Okay, one last comment before we move on. Kids in the country do face getting up early in the morning to catch a bus. So there is a segment of our population that they can get out of bed very early and get to school, so.
Most of our kids.
Duly noted.
Yeah, so, I mean, mom and dad get those kids going at time to get to school. Next is the driveway or access at Carl Traeger.
You have 22 minutes to go through 5 other items, so just.
Let's stay on task.
Kind of get.
I think, I don't know, Stan, if you talked to James Fox about this, but anyway, when we were talking at staff meeting, some people just ask where we're at with that. So as you're aware, from the city's standpoint, the school district hired Strand to reevaluate the study. They've done the study twice now, I believe, and they came up with some alternatives. The issue there is it's a school property issue that's located in the city that's on a county highway. So you have 3 entities involved. So anyway, so for anybody that's asking, I've updated our traffic review board because they've dealt with this issue a number of times. So Strand provided 3 alternatives. There was kind of the as is. There's a possible traffic signal, and then there was a roundabout. The roundabout scored the highest, but it was also the most expensive. So we had a change in the county highway commissioners in this time period as well. So initially, the thought was they didn't think they could get the county board to support necessarily a roundabout because of the cost, and it's an issue at a school, or private entity's driveway per se. So they thought, well, maybe they could support part of a traffic signal, so we looked at some of those alternatives. But basically where we left it is, our working committee worked with Strands, we came up with those alternatives, but right now it's kind of out of our hands, and it's kind of, in your hands for what you want to do with the county. The county wasn't really supportive of any of the alternatives, and I understand from their perspective was, if we do this here, we have other areas in the county that have similar issues, and then we're going to set a precedent, and how do I explain to those other entities that we did it here and not there? So we're kind of at a standstill. We're still willing to work with you on any solution that the three parties can agree to, but that's kind of where we're at.
Let me speak to the issue. This is one of the, if there is any advantage to global warming, let me assure you that the correlation between upset parents calling school board members and upset parents calling me on that issue is when there's heavy snow in December during holiday concerts. There is no other time that anybody ever talks about it. And that is this year, again, we had no snow and no problems because there was, we had the equal number of holiday concerts, and we had no traffic problems because there wasn't a buildup of snow that slowed the departure from Traeger Middle or Traeger Elementary. I would remind there is a street plotted out of that property that goes to the north that could go right into a residential street that was originally planned for that location, and because of the neighborhood not wanting a second exit out of that school, the solution is the lowest cost one, and one, if you look at locations, you can still see the markings of where that street should go. And so that exists, but for the last 2 years, global warming has protected us from snow and in December, and board members have not received a single call on that issue, and I've not, because if they do, I do, because they tell me, and what are you doing about it? But but that's reality. So we don't have a solution, but the cheapest, the most efficient, but yet politically the most sensitive is simply completing the previously planned northern route out of the property, and that would take care of it.
Okay.
Any other questions? If not, we'll move on to a transportation development plan, town survey.
Okay, I'll make it real quick. We hit on the transportation development plan already. This came up at our last meeting. It is just a real quick 5-question, 5-minute survey. I think this might have been emailed to, I know it came to some of the council. It might have, okay, it hasn't come to you guys, good. There are some paper copies, and if you want to put your email, I can forward the email to you, including the survey. What we're doing is we're reaching out to the towns, whether you have students in the district that are living in these rural areas, or you have teachers, staff, anybody that, we just need some feedback on potential transit-focused areas of assistance, and if there's a need for that. So this is going into our plan. Any feedback that you see fit would be greatly appreciated. So I'll just pass that around, and if you want to participate, please do. We have until March 31st on that. Jim, is there anything you want to add?
No, that's great that Caroline brought this up, but basically, as part of our transit development plan, like we had mentioned, Appleton, like a lot of their surrounding communities, contributes to their transit system. Here, only the city does. So there's needs out in the towns that people have asked about. So as part of that plan, East Central, who's working on the plan for us, has reached out to the towns, and they're just asking the people out there, do you have a need for transit, and if you do, to what extent, and are you willing to contribute? So they just want to get some feedback so we can put that in our plan. If they're interested, then great, we'll start working with them. If they're not, then at least we know. So that's kind of what we're looking for.
It sounds like the towns haven't responded.
Correct. So now we're reaching out to other entities, and you guys are included in that, so thank you.
And we have board members who are living in the towns who can
Correct.
become those representatives.
Yes, excellent. Thank you.
And I think that's why, I think one of our committee members had brought that up. They must know that some of the board members live in the town, so they're like, well, why don't you ask the school board members to fill it out? So,
good.
Anyway, that's all.
Thank you. Mark Polko.
I think I'm going to have John Fitzpatrick come up and talk about that. Just give the school board a little overview of what what it is and how we're using it, and even with the discussions we've had tonight in terms of getting citizen engagement may assist in that. So, John, if you could do that.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Polko is a company that was formed in Madison, and they were in contact with Mark and I, I don't know, probably about 5 years ago, possibly.
No, not that much, a couple of years.
Couple of years, and we just didn't really have the opportunity to use their services at that point. We wanted to think about what sort of projects we might be able to apply to their technology. And really what they are is they're a citizen engagement platform to provide the opportunity for greater input from the community. And I think, as you know, as elected officials, some people feel comfortable coming to the meetings. Some people feel more comfortable talking privately. You know, there are other people that don't have the opportunity to talk to you, or may feel less confident talking to you. So this is just another way to gather additional input from the community to try to help us make the best policy decisions we can. Not only the council members, but the staff too. So it's just another tool for us to gather information. And just to give you an idea of how we're planning to use them, we've contracted with them, and we have a citizen survey that we send out every year. We work with University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh and their graduate program. They do a great job for us. And but we wanted to, the council members had some concerns about trying to reach varied populations and making sure that we were doing a good job retrieving all the information we could about how we're doing and how we could do better. So we talked to Dr. Samantha Larson at the university. She's the one that manages the policy analysis class of graduate students that works on this project for us. And also we've put her in contact with Dr. Mastrinardi. I'm sorry. It's a good thing he's not here today. And he's the person who is the founder of Polko. And so they're going to be working together to help us improve our citizen survey. They're going to be making a brief presentation to our council on February 27th. So if you want to tune in and watch that, it's going to be at the beginning of the meeting. We're going to talk a little bit about that, and also talk a little bit about how Polko works. And to give you an example, in another municipality, I don't know how familiar you are with like Bar Harbor, Maine, but they, are you? My son just moved back from Portland, Maine. So it's a really neat area. There's a lot of islands, and Bar Harbor's close to Nova Scotia, and so they had a question with their community. They wanted to try to determine whether or not they should continue their ferry service, and you know, it was seasonal, and you know, should it be expanded? Should these transportation services be expanded? Not unlike how we were discussing this topic earlier today. And so they use Polko to educate the community, provide some ideas about what the topical area is, and then they put it out, and it can be sent out in a variety of different forms. The way that it works for us, it can be sent out with social media. It can also be sent out, it can be accessed. We have an app we call Connect Oshkosh, where we work through See-Click Fix, so people can provide us input. So it's on our app, so it can be downloaded from our Connect Oshkosh app can be downloaded from our city website, so anybody can go there, and there's a Polko mini app inside there that people can connect with, or they can go directly to Polko. And then you sign up, and then what happens is there's no personal information that's ever provided from the individuals who provide input and their opinions on a particular topic on Polko. But I like that Badger song, by the way, too. And but anyway, you can also register on Polko's website themselves, and it's just polko.us. You can go there and do that too. So we just wanted to make you aware that we're going to be working with them, and we're certainly happy to share any information we can with you, or put you in contact with them if you think it's something that can be helpful for the school district. Or you can just watch us, and we can let you know how it's going with us and give you an update for future use later on.
And I've been on it already, and I've taken a couple of your surveys.
Oh, yeah?
It's very easy to use.
Good.
Very user-friendly.
Well, good. It's good to hear.
Councilperson Pansky, it's your turn.
Okay, I believe some of you, the school board members, received an email. I received an email from a member of the community as well. And I had brought this issue to Mr. Roloff's attention, the fact that we do recognize Martin Luther King Jr. Day. It is a state holiday, it's a federal holiday. We do recognize it here at the city level, but our offices are open. City Hall is open, the county building is open, Health and Human Services is open, and there's also a school that day. As a parent with 2 children in the public school system, I know that the following Monday you were closed at the end of the semester. So I'm just wondering if there's any interest on both sides here to officially recognize this day and close our offices. I know that involves moving around something, and you have the end of the semester at this time, but I don't know how council feels either. This is a policy decision that we can make as a council, but I think as a community, we should be recognizing this and addressing this and making this change and closing and honoring this civil rights leader.
The issue we've been tackling, I was shocked when I came to the district 6 years ago that we were not closed for Martin Luther King Day, but we and many of our districts around us have not been closed. As our calendar committee is evolving, in fact, on the 14th of February in our workshop, the calendar committee will be coming forth with recommendation to consider Martin Luther King Day as a closed day for students, but using it as a staff development day for our staff. The real question comes as to in urban areas where there are lots of activities that are issues of organized planned service in honoring Dr. King. There is great reason to potentially have students not in school because it starts with breakfasts and neighborhood gatherings and all kinds of issues that really don't exist in the community. But we were interested to seeing what's happening. Because I've received about 5 years ago, African-American father came to me and said, you know, nothing was happening for my child on Martin Luther King Day, and we wanted to find out what was happening. We asked our principals to attend to the issue, and you will find a massive list of activities that are occurring on Martin Luther King Day that commemorate Dr. King.
In the schools?
In the schools. So it has not been a neutral time for the, and bearing in mind that our total minority population is roughly about 22%, of which about 4 or 5% is African American in that range. The real question does come in the long run as to how do we educate children not of color about the significance of Martin Luther King, and that continues to be a concern. We simply put together a list and had all of our principals submit all the varying activities, and you can see a myriad of activities that were going on in different schools for Martin Luther King Day. The question of observance is one that we will have the board discuss and decide on the 14th, or get a workshop on, but they'll decide on the 28th of February as to approving a calendar that could include being a staff development day, but not a holiday for students, but not for staff. And that's one of the ways that we don't extend our school year, but we accomplish the goal of needing staff development days that are worked into the school year. The issue is one that's always very sensitive. As I said, I was shocked because I had sensed the observance of that. But there are other holidays. We have school on, but we have observances as well. We have a magnificent set of Veterans Day observances that many of you have participated in that honor veterans on November 11th. Regardless of what day of the week that is, it was restored to being November 11th. And then we have some other second-tier holidays that we don't necessarily always observe. Remember, we would alienate the Native American population if we celebrated Columbus Day, but no mail is delivered. But I believe, is the city open on? Yes. And and President's Day. No mail is delivered, but we have a combined Lincoln and Washington, and now it's all presidents are honored. But we don't have that same level of, and those are considered, as is Martin Luther King Day, second-tier holidays under the nomenclature. Now, that doesn't sound nice, but that's the reality, that there are permissible, and that's why schools continue to operate under being able to be open. I think we're making a wise decision, if the board supports it, to not have school on that day, but we will need to continue to find ways to educate both and recognize both minority students as well as majority students on how significant that day is, and we should do so accordingly. We've had participation always with a number of our schools with the Martin Luther King essay contest that's awarded at the university, and each of those activities. But this is being addressed. How we keep it in the front of the significance of his leadership in the front of all students is really the critical issue, and that we should be honoring. So it's something we're trying to resolve, and the board will need to decide that priority there, because and I know I've heard several board members talk about the fact that how do we impact white majority kids where it's simply a day off, and that's really the issue at hand. And I totally understand that. Most of my previous experience had either between 40 and 60% students of color in the district, and you wouldn't think of having school on that day because you also had a tremendous number of alternatives for students. There is one issue that I'm particularly concerned if that does exist, in working with the leadership ownership of the herd. One of the traditions that have existed repeatedly in Minneapolis is the Timberwolves have a afternoon game on Martin Luther King Day. Why, in lieu of what we recently experienced as a PBIS reward, but a scheduled matinee basketball game by the herd, why not schedule that on Martin Luther King Day in the future? Because that would be one of the activities, and of which 80% of the players are African American. Why not honor heroism in that area as well?
I, like the rest of you, haven't had a chance really to look through this, but one statement that sticks out for me with the Webster Stanley, which happens to be the last one on the list, is that Webster Stanley is living this every day, not just on MLK Day. That's one of the things that people of color often talk about, that it shouldn't just be a day, it should be something that is throughout the school, that we promote acceptance and tolerance and history of various subgroups. Wisconsin also has a tradition of having a number of days that are built into the state constitution that require recognition of certain individuals. For example, Mildred Fish Harnack, I'm not sure many of you would know who that is, but Mildred is one of, I think she's supposed to be honored in the month of September. I'll let you look that up so that it's something to do when you get home tonight. And Flag Day. Now, Flag Day is not typically a day when public schools have their regular school calendar in effect, but summer school may be impacted by that. But I agree with Mr. Mack. I think it's important that students understand Martin Luther King, and whether it's talked about on that day or it's talked about at other times, and it permeates the curriculum, contributions of other minority groups. Here in Oshkosh, many of the names that you see when we had a phone book that you see in the cemetery come from those of us who have heritage of Germans from Russia. We were the descendants of individuals whose ancestors were German, went to Russia, and for various reasons came to this country. The Abe Rockland smokestack over near the river is something that exemplifies that. So just knowing some of that heritage of the various groups that have made contributions to this community and our nation, I think, are important.
From the city's perspective, we have 8 recognized holidays where city hall offices are closed, and we have 4 floating holidays. And I think that really dates back to our history with collective bargaining. We still have 3 to 5, depending on your perspective, collective bargaining units with the city, so those would still need to be bargained with that. The council could recognize alternate holidays. We may need to negotiate those. With respect to, Councilmember Pansky brought it up to me. Tracy Robertson from Fit Oshkosh also brought it up to me. And Tracy and I had a very good discussion, and she said, so pretty much it's changed. I go, oh yeah, change is always the tough one. We do have one of our 8 recognized holidays it's politely called Spring Holiday, but it's Good Friday. I mean, but years ago, we stopped calling it Good Friday. Now, I've heard from employees in the past when I've suggested moving holidays around, not in the context of Martin Luther King Day, but just in general. And most employees like that holidays, especially our field workers in streets that don't get days off in the winter very often, and there's a welcomed break. So those are the only things the council could consider moving a holiday such as Spring Holiday. They could consider taking one of the floating holidays and making it a fixed holiday. Those are the options that are available for the council.
And mail is delivered on that date. So if that's a
And that's not a federal, so it's not a federal holiday, but Columbus Day and President's Day and Veterans Day and Martin Luther King Day are recognized.
Are we able to use the POLCO tool internally as well as externally? So would that be something at a survey question could be sent out to city staff?
Well, that's a good question. We haven't really explored that possibility, but we could do that. We could do it in another way too if it isn't possible.
There's other methods that
Yeah.
we could do that.
So one of the things that I mean, I think it's good to poll our staff in order related to this, but my history with celebrating Martin Luther King is a very deep history. I used to organize marches in Oshkosh on literally the coldest day of the year, met for many years in snowstorms and all of that, to march up Algoma Boulevard. And so to me, it's not just about making it accessible for our staff to be able to take part in that. It's about creating a culture of understanding, education, compassion in our community, and celebrating the rich life and words and actions of that person. And I think that's really the ultimate goal, is that if we're going to take the day off on that day, we need to make it a real celebration. And it needs to be, if we're going to do that citywide, it needs to be understood that there's going to be events taking place, not necessarily a march, though that would be great, but there needs to be some type of activities throughout the day, throughout our community, really embracing, really celebrating, really enhancing the ideas of Martin Luther King Jr. in our community. I lived in the South for a couple of years, and it was bigger than Christmas, to be honest with you. The schools, all the kids didn't go to school that day because they had the day off. They could go and march in these long march processions in relation to Martin Luther King's dreams and actions and words. And it ended at a large, either church or large arena where they would just literally bring in not hundreds of thousands, but hundreds and thousands of people into this, and there'd be people just speaking about Martin Luther King. And that's what I picture. I don't just picture, if we're gonna say, yeah, let's take the day off, let's celebrate it that way, we need to go beyond. And I think that's kind of and I think that's the idea of what we're talking about, what we try to do in the school district, is that we try to educate our kids because they're going to be there on that day about that. And I think that's really important, and I'd rather stick with that if we're not going to completely embrace it as a community of, let's go out and create an annual, and there are events in the community that celebrate Martin Luther King and contemporaries, but I think it needs to be like a full day thing. And saying to our staff, and this is something I don't want to say to our teachers and to our support staff of the district, is that, yeah, we're going to take off Martin Luther King Day, but you still got to do an in-service. I think, to me, Martin Luther King's about a full community of people getting together and talking about that. And so it's to me, it's a little bit more elaborate.
To your point, the universities is a community
I know.
event. but the community doesn't come out, unfortunately. But they do have a lot of activities on campus, so I think what we could do is expand off of that. There is a Martin Luther King committee that works, I know, with the schools, because I was at the event this year, and they gave out the awards to all the different schools and the essays and the top essays and things that the kids wrote. So I think it would just be a matter of, I agree, I like what the school district's doing already, and I just think that we could maybe work closer with the Martin Luther King University committee that they have and make a few more community events. But they actually on campus have more than just that celebration that night. They have other activities that's open to the citizens of Oshkosh to come.
I helped create some of them when I was there.
Yeah.
So, and I think we're on the same page. It's just the idea is that there should be not just a centralization of the idea of Martin Luther King Jr., but there should be events all over the city, that make it easier for people to go to neighborhoods, the neighborhood church or their neighborhood school to learn about Martin Luther King too. It just, I think that there's he was such a great man, and I think that just celebrating with a day off and just doing that is a disservice. So.
Obviously, we're not in Alabama where
Sure.
it was also Jefferson Davis Day at the same time.
But that's also not too, I gotta be honest with you, I mean, those issues, as large as they were in the South, they existed here. So let's not denigrate the idea of that. The issues of Martin Luther King, the issues that he talked about were just as prevalent here, and actually probably even more hidden here than they were in the South. So I think it's really important that if we're gonna do this, that we do it right. And do it great.
All right, let's move on. We're past the 7:30. I promised everyone we'd end at 7:30, and it's now pushing 20 of 8. I will keep my part short. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. The chief of police and I went to a Winnebago County Drug and Alcohol Coalition meeting yesterday in Morton, and it was substance use in the workplace. And what was kind of disappointing, there was no solutions. We all know there's a problem. And I put this on here for a couple of reasons, but the transportation discussion, what is happening in the homes where there is alcohol, drug use and abuse to the kids? Is that one of the reasons that they're not getting on that bus, or why they're truant? I think again, we've heard statistics are statistics, but where do things like this come into play? Sandy, you and I have talked about quality of housing, this whole rental issue. Are these children starting out with a big disadvantage because their parents don't have parenting skills, or they're using drugs and alcohol, and not having a beer at night in front of the kids?
Yeah.
Where does that come into our responsibility to the children to see? I mean, it's a huge problem. As the chief and I left the meeting, it was like there are no solutions. And I came up with a couple of things like, well, what are people doing interventions? Well, they take too long. Well, if done right, they go very quickly, type of thing. So I think that's something we have to address as a community, and the effect it's really having on children.
And I can speak to this from some personal experience recently with some social workers in the community and also in other communities. When a social worker or child protection or any of those folks who are working on the front line, so to speak, with those kids that have been reported, not talking about the ones who haven't, when they say that parent has to be walking on water thinking they're Jesus before we can do anything about them not being in the home. Or when they say, I'm closing this case because we don't find the child is unsafe just because they can't get to school or they don't have breakfast, or, if that level has to be that hard or that critical, we know that it's impacting quality of life, right? We know that it is.
How many kids are using in the high school and even before high school? How many kids are using? And I told Stan, I've told other people, growing up, there are kids, that are rich kids in town. I had a lot of friends who were rich kids. As you get older, you talk to them, and they start to kind of talk about their life as being, quote, this rich kid with alcoholic parents. Their life was worse than kids in poverty. I've had some say we were institutionalized, which meant we were sent off to camps, boarding schools. Some of the mothers died in their 50s from drinking. So the impact it has on these kids is they carry it with them throughout their life, and it happens to all levels in society. But I think, how do we as a community address it?
That's a topic that we could do a number of days together.
Yeah.
One of the things that Matt Kremer, our director of pupil personnel, is leading, and he's in charge of both supervising both social workers, counselors, psychologists, and nurses in the district, and dealing with lots of training. We're dealing with staff in responding to those issues, and I can tell you that at some point in time, I think it would be worthwhile potentially for Matt's knowledge to be shared with council and to deal with, because he's working every day with our staff members who are working in this area, and the drug and alcohol are really side effects and symbolic symptoms of the bigger crisis, family crisis, whether it's poverty and all the varying other issues that relate to it, to underemployment. Even in this day and age, underemployment being there are families in crises that drug and alcohol is simply a symptom of a greater crisis.
In my example, it's not always poverty. There are some kids coming out of some very wealthy environment.
But the family dynamics are unhealthy. There are all kinds of reasons, but I can tell you that we are dealing with these issues every day, and we're working with constantly working with our staff to be supportive and to respond, and to even for classroom teachers to respond appropriately to those children in crisis, and we see it every single day, and it's a symptom of a very big issue, and not just this community, but when I talk to colleagues across the state, we're dealing with all those same issues.
And I think Stan's right. I think we could talk about it for days and days, but I think it's kind of interesting to see, we're here as the city and the school district talking about these issues and how it impacts our ability to service the community. And, I have friends that are teachers, and they talk about how it's difficult for them to be able to educate students because they have to deal with a lot of those social issues. And, in speaking for Mark, I know he would say too, and our protective service chiefs, that our employees, oftentimes are impacted by a lot of social problems that prevent them from being able to do their job too. They're called for services that ordinarily would be transportation issues, or other family members might be ordinarily helping their family members get to the doctor or hospital or to other places, but because they have no one else to contact, they contact us. So it impacts our ability to provide the services that we need to provide at the city level too, so it is an important issue.
At the recent WASB convention, I took a session on trauma and how it affects students. And one of the points I took away from that is that, and it dovetails back to our first topic, if a kid's not in school, chances are they had some trauma that night or the night before. Parent got arrested, somebody came down with a serious disease, somebody died, and it's just, it's, and trauma is really takes in all that.
And when we deal with, and our police department is assisting us with student fights in school, they didn't start in school. Many of them that they occurred on the weekend, or a crisis occurred overnight in the family household that set them on edge, that created an environment that they now are venting in school, and certainly the partnership with the city and the school district, and certainly county officials, because the whole judicial aspect of that is in the county's hands, is something that's definitely worth heavy-duty conversations as to where do you start.
There's no further comments. Skip over other.
At this point.
Next meeting is April 30th, 2018. Time and location to be determined.
We threw
You
that-
can be the
I'll run it
moderator.
next time.
We,
too.
we threw that out there because it's a fifth Monday of the month, so fifth,
Oh.
some things of the month are always
Gee, we're not busy.
opportunistic for us.
Great. Perfect.
Well, thank you for everyone
Cheryl and
coming.
Diane
This has
figured
been
that out, so.
Yeah, thank you.
very good
Cheryl, thank you.
discussion. Very good.
Because you and I-